In Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I am Sweeney Gray. We start in Pakistan, where vote count is underway, and according to unofficial projections, Imran Khan's PTI party is leading the polls. It's been reported that so far, 35% of the votes have been counted. Imran's party is expected to win somewhere around 110 seats. The Pakistan Muslim League, led by the brother of the jailed former Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, has been projected to get around 65 seats. The third major party, the Pakistan People's Party, with Bilal Bhutto as its prime ministerial candidate, will get around 40 seats. However, the Election Commission has not given any results. They were supposed to give preliminary results a few hours ago, but the secretary of the Electoral Commission told the local media that they're facing technical issues and they won't be able to publish any results anytime soon. And while the Pakistan Muslim League's Shehbaz Sharif says he rejects the forecasted victory of Imran Khan.
Today, what they have done is push Pakistan back 30 years. And this way, the public mandate of billions of people who voted in Pakistan, such a type of disgrace is unbearable.
The young candidate Bilal Bhutto from the Pakistan People's Party took to Twitter to complain about the delay in announcing the initial results. He said that his party's polling agents were thrown out of polling stations by the electoral authorities across the countries. He said the delay in declaring results is inexcusable and outrageous. The government of Nicaragua says they have been able to restore peace and calm after the ongoing siege by various opposition groups. Nicaraguans in Managua and Masaya, the two most affected cities by the violence, have resumed their normal day-to-day activities. Some business owners have expressed the importance of re-establishing peace and security for the development of the country, and while others have lamented that some businesses remain closed due to the destruction and looting of their businesses. And on Tuesday, the president of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, spoke with Telesur's president, Patricia Villegas, in an exclusive Telesur interview about the situation in his country. Ortega says the internal fractures in his country come from U.S. congressional members and groups in Miami.
The United States always had a grip of the Congress, and they're in the Florida state, and they're against the revolution. And they go against Cuba, against Venezuela, and of course Nicaragua as well. So they are the ones that took in the ones against revolution in the 80s. Those people, those Americans, those who promoted the financing of the war in the United States against Nicaragua. What really shook this alliance was the initiative called NICAT. It is a law addressed to block Nicaragua access to funds of international organizations. And this really broke businessmen. Some of them were supporting this law, and they were doing everything they could to approve it.
President Ortega mentioned what has been called the NICA Act as the start of the action against Nicaragua. Here's more on that.
The Nicaragua Investment Conditionality Act was sponsored by Republicans Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Florida Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen. Under the act, the U.S. would block loans from international financial institutions that would benefit Nicaragua. The act is supposed to promote democracy and combat corruption. The NICA Act promotes the presence of USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy in Nicaragua, organizations which many Nicaraguans blame for promoting and funding the violence. The bill was passed by the U.S. House of Representatives and is headed for the Senate.
Meanwhile, the U.S. House of Representatives have approved a resolution condemning the Nicaraguan government. The resolution urges the U.S. government to support the people of Nicaragua in their call for early elections. In recent interviews with Telesur and other international media outlets, Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega warned that the United States President Donald Trump and U.S. lawmakers are pushing for a coup and sponsoring the violent protests against him. The resolution was presented by the Congressman Ileana Rose Letienne, a Cuban-American Republican from Florida. She's a staunch detractor of the late Cuban President Fidel Castro, Chavismo, and progressive politics in Latin America.
And my constituents tell me they're heartbroken.
Newly elected Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has proposed facing illegal migration with development plans in Mexico and in Latin America.
In a letter addressed to United States President Donald Trump, Andrés Manuel López Obrador has proposed a development plan to reduce migration to the United States.
We made a proposal to President Donald Trump, and we are waiting for their response.
The regional development project includes the collaboration of Central American countries with amounts equivalent to their economies. According to members of the Morena Party, this will mitigate migratory flow.
If there's development in your country, if there are jobs and education, fewer people will leave.
Even if the details are not defined, López Obrador's letter to President Donald Trump puts on the table the advantage of not having to invest in border security while redirecting those funds in more productive directions.
Mexico can no longer be the immigration police for the United States. It's obvious that there should be another way.
The clear alternative is the creation of jobs, something that would impact more things than just migration.
As part of migration, but also as part of security and the impact of violence, considering Central America is fundamental for Mexico to make any plan towards the future.
During the first half of the year, Mexico has detained 50,000 Central American migrants as part of the Frontera Sur program, a policy imposed by Washington to the government of Enrique Peña Nieto.
The opposition in St. Lucia is speaking out against Prime Minister Alan Chastain's decision to impose restrictions on Venezuelan visas, while at the same time lifting restrictions for Chinese citizens. Prime Minister Chastain has blamed an influx of arms and drugs in the country on Venezuelan migrants. Opposition party, the Lucian People's Movement, has rejected the Prime Minister's rationale and instead called on him to focus on new ideas and strategic measures in upgrading and improving the country's intelligence and security mechanisms.
All we're saying, Mr. Speaker, is on the principle of national security interest, that we have been working in collaboration with the Venezuelan government in order to ensure that we can secure our borders. Yes. Let us remind ourselves that we are only 6 hours away by a fast boat to Venezuela.
More news in a minute, but first, here's a video from our multimedia colleagues. Welcome back. The Colombian Federation of Teachers, FICO, have held a 24-hour strike demanding protection in face of threats they continue to receive. Teachers are demanding security guarantees and are asking for social campaigns to promote schools as territories of peace. FICO said that since 2018, the number of teachers being murdered has increased dramatically. The president of the federation said the killings are politically motivated. And our correspondent in Bogota, Paolo Fernandez, joined protesters as they took to the streets.
Thousands of teachers have taken to the streets of Bogota and other cities like Cali, Cartagena, and Barranquilla to protest for the defense of life. I am going to ask this teacher what the main reason for the march is.
This march is in defense of a decent and worthy life for all Colombian people.
Teachers are being murdered. A dean was recently killed in Putumayo, but you also face constant threats. What is happening with the teachers?
This is part of the political strategy of the far right. They want to silence the voices of the Colombian people. This is not a political movement. We are all civic leaders who defend the right to life, the right to live in worthy conditions, the right to education.
You are not marching only for the rights of the teachers, but also for the right to education, for the rights of your students. What are you asking for the country's education system?
We are asking for a decent budget, for good conditions, so that communities can have proper education at a regional level. This is a bourgeois campaign that seeks to eliminate all social leaders in Colombia, because we're waking up to the cruel reality of our country.
This is the day Colombia is facing, a national demonstration all throughout the country in which teachers demand safety guarantees.
Workers and students from one of Uruguay's most important universities have declared a 24-hour strike to demand a higher budget for their institution. Our correspondent in Montevideo, Mateo Grie, has more.
Compañeros, estamos en la puerta de la Universidad de la República.
We're standing at the gates of the University of the Republic, which will remain closed for 24 hours. Students, teachers, and university workers call for this strike to demand a higher budget for the university. In specific, they are demanding that the government allocate 6% of the country's GDP for education and 1% for research and development purposes. The government has yet to respond, but they have been trying to maintain a dialogue. On Friday, university workers are set to meet with government officials in order to discuss ways in which the budget could be modified to meet the demands of protesters. No final agreements are expected, but protesters are hopeful about the upcoming dialogue. Later in the day, there will be a large demonstration as a show of force and support outside the university.
Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva continues to drum up support in favor of his freedom and the right to be a candidate for the presidency. Lula has received more than 15,000 letters during his 110 days in prison. The Workers' Party released a document demanding Lula's freedom, which has received more than 2,000 signatures in just 2 days. The document will be delivered to the Supreme Court. In the last couple of weeks, social movements have organized an agenda full of activities like the Lula Libre Festival, which gathers more than 40 artists in Rio de Janeiro on Saturday, 28th of July. Our correspondent in Brazil, Andre Vieira, has more.
We're in the northeast of Brazil, in the city of Aracaju, following mobilizations that demand the freedom of former President Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva. Today is International Rural Workers' Day, and the Landless Workers Movement are organizing a march to denounce setbacks on the agrarian reform during the government of Michel Temer, and also to demand Lula's freedom. Many campesinos said that Lula is a political prisoner, and that the court sentence seeks to stop Lula from running in the upcoming presidential elections in October. They said that Lula is a candidate of the poor, of the people whose lives changed and improved during Lula's and Dilma Rousseff's terms in office. People in other cities are also mobilizing, like in Rio de Janeiro, where a festival, Freedom for Lula, will take place on Saturday, with many Brazilian artists and social activists, to tell the world that Lula is a political prisoner.
An international commission has arrived in Ecuador to investigate the deaths of the 3 journalists and their driver murdered on the northern border with Colombia.
The relatives of the press team murdered on the border with Colombia have submitted information from the government to an international commission. The families are unsatisfied with the information they received and are questioning the decision adopted by the government during the abduction.
80% of the information delivered today is public. What classified information are they giving us? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
The relatives also reiterated they will continue with the struggle to find out the truth about the murders of their loved ones.
The families are leading this process once again. We're asking for specific information to Colombia. The lack of information is undeniable. That is why we're presenting these documents.
The International Commission to investigate the case will continue to analyze the information given by the relatives, and they also will meet with several Ecuadorian authorities who were part of the negotiations.
It is important that a flag be raised so that these cases won't happen again and that those who are to be sanctioned will.
The International Commission will stay in Ecuador until July 27. At the end of their visit, the Commission will present the first part of their conclusions. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
Jamaica is doing its part to implement agreements made during the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting earlier this month. The Jamaican cabinet has announced they've taken a decision to focus on the CARICOM single market but not the economy. This means that the free movement of people and capital is of a priority to Jamaica, and plans are underway to develop the proper regulatory framework to support free movement throughout the region. Trinidad and Tobago is hosting a meeting in November to discuss the single market and economy.
The management of the Council for Finance and Planning, COFAP, will finalize the required instruments to enable the coordination of fiscal policies as well as other mechanisms across member states. This should be in place by July 2019.
Trinidad and Tobago's Ministry of Health is once again looking to Cuba to fill nurse shortages in the nation's hospitals. The Minister of Health, Terence Dialsing, says there are approximately 800 nursing positions open, but not all of them will be filled by Cuban nurses. His response comes after there were complaints from the Nurses Union. The Health Minister says Cuban nurses are being sought for specialist areas like cardiac surgery, oncology, or intensive care. Time now for another short break, but we will return after this video from our colleagues in multimedia. Welcome back. The Greek seashore has been destroyed by wildfires decimating the forests across the Atacama region. It's claiming hundreds of victims. It is an environmental tragedy that experts say could have been avoided.
Summer has arrived in the Mediterranean countries, and with it, fears of new wildfires, which increase in ferocity every year. This year, Greece is the victim, with a series of fires that are devouring forests, towns, and everything in its path. The coastal village of Mati was the starting point of the tragedy.
We took our cars and went down to the sea and got into the sea to escape. But there were people who did not make it. We got into the water and stayed there for about 5 hours until the boats came to pick us up. We were at the Argiri Acti beach with about 250 to 300 people. Some were burned, some were near fainting from the smoke and the flames. Groups of us, we were holding each other by the hand and shouting each other's names. because we could not see from the smoke.
I had my grandson in my arms for 5 hours. I was trying to save the children. Even though it was still day, it was dark. There was so much smoke. The children almost choked. Thank God nothing happened to them. Everything else, gone.
Residents are now trying to recover, but it's tough when there are still bodies missing and many have lost everything. Social and environmental organizations say they've been warning about the hazards of wildfires. In the 21st century, fires no longer spread, they explode.
So far we have found 30 bodies which were dead, were burned, and we have we're trying to locate another 4 which so far are missing.
It is discouraging to see this destruction. A few days ago, there were trees and everything was green. Now everything is burned. Complete desolation and sadness.
Environmentalists argue that the Mediterranean countries have an outdated approach to fighting wildfires, and their emergency services are not up to the job of dealing with these super fires. Now they want long-term policies to stop climate change. At the same time, the austerity policies imposed on the region have cut the budgets for prevention. Residents say the forests are not properly maintained to avoid the fast spread of fires. Greece has declared 3 days of national mourning to pay tribute to the victims.
The country is going through an unspeakable tragedy. Dozens of people have died, and that is unbearable for everyone, especially for the families that lost loved ones.
Last year, it was Portugal that suffered tragedy, with 66 victims in May 2017. The summer in Europe has just started, and Greece is already mourning hundreds of victims. Meanwhile, citizens are demanding new policies and investments to prevent such environmental catastrophes from being repeated over and over again.
Leaders from the BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, are meeting in Johannesburg for the group's 10th summit. This year's summit is expected to mainly revolve around the trade war triggered by high tariffs imposed on a number of countries by the United States President Donald Trump. The leaders of the emerging economies wish to work together to promote multilateral global trade and fight protectionism. They're also expected to bolster the BRICS financial institution, the New Development Bank. Angelo Fick, he's the research director at ASRI, joined us earlier from Johannesburg to discuss the importance of BRICS and some of the challenges member countries face.
So I think firstly, the relationship is really beneficial to Africa's elites, both the business people as well as government. And what Xi Jinping and Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of the Republic of South Africa, indicated today in their speeches was that this actually has to begin to benefit ordinary people. 40% of the world's population live inside BRICS countries, but it's Africa and its emerging economies that really are the focus of so many people's aspirations. But the concern is, speaking in the most unequal society in the world, South Africa, that this beneficiation goes beyond the elites, beyond business people, and roll out for the population as a whole. And that, I think, is going to be a major challenge for Britain.
Zimbabwe's opposition leader Nelson Chamisa of the MDC party has accused the ruling party and the electoral authorities of bias and suspects that the elections will be riddled with fraud. However, Chamisa insisted that his party would not boycott the vote and is still confident of a victory despite questionable practices by the ruling ZANU-PF party. International observers have been invited to the elections.
Have you agreed to... They will not win this election. They will not.
The 12 boys rescued from a flooded cave in Thailand 2 weeks ago took part in a Buddhist ordination ceremony. The group of children shaved their heads and paid tribute to the driver who lost his life during the rescue operation. 11 of the footballers are preparing to live as novice monks and stay in monasteries for 9 days. Their coach will also enter monkhood as an adult. Only one player will not be ordained as he is Christian, but he also attended the ceremony. An injured sloth has captured the hearts of Bolivians who have band together to pay for the animal's medical care after he was struck by a car. The sloth, which has been named Pancho, was taken to the Agroflori Wildlife Refuge Center in the Central Bolivian department of Cochabamba, where veterinarians determined that he has injured one eye and fractured his arm. Now, while they were unable to restore his sight, a team of 5 doctors will operate to remove the damaged eye and put a steel rod in his arm. Pancho will then be kept at the Wildlife Refuge Center as they monitor his recovery. and his rehabilitation. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talisiotv.net/English. And join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Talsio English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, English.